we currently have in our economy and identifying any issues that may exist there, and how do we sustain them and retain them, and provide opportunity for expansion in the long run. And so with that, uh, that's really one of the key components to this presentation and this effort is looking at our tourism and hospitality industry. It's an important industry here in Steamboat Springs and Routt County. And as part of the city's STAR program, they identified further understanding the importance of this base industry and how it would be impacted in the long term, in the long run, by climate change, and designing pathways forward and steps that our community can take to ensure the longevity of this industry sector and its success in the long run. So with that, we commissioned a study and hired Summit Economics here, Tom Binnings and his team, to look at this and identify where we're at as a community, what the future looks like, and what are some action steps that we can take. And in part of this process, we had a project management team, which included the city, the county, and myself, as well as a business advisory committee. So I know we have attendees that participated on that, and I want to thank everyone for participating in this. It's been a good project, and we've got lots of good information as we really look down the road and identify what we need to do as a community. With that, I want to introduce Tom Bennings, and he'll take it away from here with the presentation. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you, John. And so this process for us began about back in August with several areas of research. Very interesting project, and you'll hear a little bit more about the uniqueness as we go forward. I'm working with Paul Rochette as well as Jason Dateline, and we kind of are going to present jointly today on different segments and encourage your participation. If you have any questions, please go ahead and post them under the Q&A, and we'll stop about halfway through the presentation and look at those questions and answer them so that all the material we've covered up to that point is good to go. We have submitted a full report, about an 80-page report, which hopefully is rather easy to read through, and that is posted on the city's website. So
And Tom, I'll drop that into the chat so that that link's there and available to everyone.
great. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and move ahead. The time frame for today is basically, pretty much up to an hour, and we'll see how it plays out here. Um, and so the first, just to kind of start, and the whole issue around climate change is certainly one that's been building momentum over the years. But last year, the World Economic Forum asked leaders throughout society, different realms, they ask them every year, what are the most consequential risks facing the world over the next decade? And last year, the top five biggest risks were all climate related, from extreme weather to collapsing ecosystems. So, it has become sort of top of mind. I think were it not for COVID in the last year, it would even be a greater top of mind concern throughout the economy and the public sector as well. The major takeaways from all the research we did, I think there are 4 points that we want to highlight here, and Jason will cover this in more depth in terms of the 10 to 30-year climate forecast are very well understood, even at the level of Routt County. The impact on local tourism is less certain, especially in the winter. The Colorado high altitude summer tourism, which has been, certainly a driver for Colorado tourism for well over a century now, will continue to benefit. And water availability for both snowmaking and ensuring adequate flows in the Yampa will be a key issue and key aspect to follow, key resource. So let me turn it over to Jason, who will talk about the climate aspects.
All right, thanks, Tom. So a big part of this focus, as John brought up, was the impacts on business. Ultimately, how are these climate impacts going to affect business? And when it comes to the climate impacts, generally speaking, when we interviewed the business community and the local community, they were generally well known. But I'd like to emphasize a couple, let's say, nuances that are maybe less known and the community is less aware of. We're all aware that climate change is stemming from warmer temperatures. We've seen about a 2.5-degree increase over the past 50 years, and we're expecting another 2.5 degrees over the next 30 years. It's accelerating, but those effects locally will be mostly seen in Routt County in the summer. This leads to some interesting things. There will be earlier snow melt that's already being seen. In most places, it's moved up by 2 weeks, and other places moved up already by about a month. Stream flow in the Yampa and the regional creeks will kind of max out at an earlier time, and you're going to see a shorter winter season. But when it comes to precipitation, a lot of people think that that's going to decrease. And the forecasts generally show, particularly for Routt County, that that's not the case. But the difference is that drought conditions will increase, and that's because the warmer temperatures will dry out the soil quicker. And that's what we've seen over the past decade to really 20 years. And all of this will really lead to one of the biggest risk factors, which is the risk of wildfire impacts, the long-term risk, which we'll get into a little bit later. And it'll also influence the Yampa River flows, which Tom just brought up, is a key aspect moving forward. Decreasing the flows increases the water temperatures, it affects agriculture, riparian ranges, and even the fishing industry as it really starts to impact the cold water fish. And over the next 10 years, we just see accelerating impacts from everything just mentioned. Winter precipitation will actually increase, but more of that will be falling as rain. And what that looks like, we're not really sure. What the impacts from that will be, we're not really sure. Between seasons, the variability will grow. Originally, we were debating about the use of climate impacts or climate variability, just because that uncertainty that comes with variability within a season of being very warm at one part or very cold at another, or having one season a lot of snow and another season very little snow, that is going to be exacerbated as we move forward. And the shoulder seasons, that's one of the biggest things, excuse me, things to look at, is that shoulder seasons will grow in importance. And part of that will, excuse me, part of that will be as more, as other areas heat up, you're going to start to see more climate refugees. It's a growing term in the research, as it's seen that as areas heat up, people flee to colder regions. But there's some uncertainty out there as well, such as, again, the winter rains. How's that going to impact the snow quality? Will that alter the snow and the ski industry and the people that come? Colorado's always been known for its powder, but if we get a little more slush, is that going to affect things? But in other areas of the country, particularly in the Northeast and the Southeast, and some of the lower altitude ski resorts out west, they're already being impacted to a greater degree than Steamboat. What are the impacts going to be from that, and will more people flee to Colorado? The reservoirs, we're not sure how most of those will be handled. A lot of those are dictated by outside entities, and how they will want to use those reservoirs to manage their own water is uncertain at this time. And extreme weather events, they have not been seen yet, but the forecasts are that those extreme events will increase in the future, and that those are largely expected to be in winter. But what are those impacts going to be? And wildfires are always a wild card, just because we don't know what they will be, the significance, and their impact. Tom, if you could move to the next slide, and we'll kind of move through those pretty quickly.
Okay.
Sorry,
Well,
apparently
there
I
we.
should not eat crackers before speaking. So when you ask people about climate change, it's almost universally negative. It's very understood why that's the point. But when you look at it through the lens of business, there are opportunities that come from it. Some of these were mentioned on the previous slide, that when you look at the country as a whole, Colorado's higher elevation acts as a buffer against some of those warming impacts. And within Colorado, despite the fact that Steamboat is a bit lower than some of the other communities, it is one of the few regions in the state that is forecasted to have a higher snow precipitation in the winter. So these actually create some opportunities where you might get people that are leaving or not able to go to their closer to home winter destinations and are now coming to Colorado. So that's one opportunity. And even within Colorado, you have some place like Wolf Creek, which traditionally is kind of more on par with Steamboat with how much snow is received. But Wolf Creek is one of those areas that's forecasted to start getting diminishing amounts of snow as we move forward. And the shoulder seasons, and this isn't just climate, but it's also due to demographic changes and just changes in society, that the shoulder seasons are becoming larger in importance. People have more mobility during those times. People are having kids at later ages. Heat is increasingly a problem during those times. All of these factors allow for this opportunity to really see and take advantage of greater opportunities during those shoulder seasons. Obviously, again, the refugees, the climate change kind of refugees, people in Texas that are already a big part of the market, the Front Range, they're going to look for cooler environments when they have that opportunity during the summer. And obviously, the high country is a good place to do that. Next slide, please, Tom. And the greatest threat, this one's easy, wildfire. Wildfire, it can devastate a tourism, the tourism industry for the year, and just have the long-term impacts as well of having very, degrading water quality. We've seen this over and over again post-wildfire for a couple of years. You have the burn scars, which hurt the aesthetics. Sometimes, most of the land that is used for trails and such in Routt County are on public land. So a lot of times those public land managers will close those trails for extended periods of time. And so there's just, this is without a doubt the biggest impact we see from climate change, and it will be a increasing risk moving forward. So a big part of the question is, how do we mitigate that threat, particularly in the recreation and urban interfaces where those meet the wildfires? So that is really about it for climate change. And I'm happy to answer any questions a little bit later during the Q&A.
Thank you, Jason. I'm just having there we go. So we're gonna turn it over to Paul Rochette, and he's gonna just talk about some of the other considerations that we looked at before beginning to formulate sort of strategic options. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, so I just turned on my video, but I don't see. Can you hear me, first of all?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, so
And we can
anyhow,
see you, so you're good.
You're good.
Yeah, we're good. All right. So The next a half dozen slides are going to cover both the outdoor recreation trends. Well, that's what we'll get to immediately next. Then we did some research with what other tourist communities are doing around the country in order to adapt to climate change. And what we're going to find is that most of the communities that we talk to are recognizing climate change, but many of them are still in the phase of mitigating the negative impacts of the climate change. Not very many of them are quite as forward thinking towards how do we adapt to that climate change and actually benefit where we can and thrive where we can. We're also going to cover a little bit on Steamboat Springs' perspective on tourism, both from the residents and then the perspective of the business community. So next slide, Tom. All right, so this slide right here is actually, it's from the Outdoor Industry Association, and they looked at participation of people, I believe it was 18 and above, by activity between 2007 and 2016. So the data is a little bit old. But what we're showing here is that the items that are in green are activities where we have seen an increase in participation rates across the country. And we can probably anticipate that this is probably very reflective of what happens in Route County as well. And so kayaking has seen an increase both in all ages and in the age group of 18 to 24. Snowshoeing, that one has only seen an increase in all ages, but not an increase in the younger demographic of 18 to 24. Stand-up paddling has grown from not existing to be still 1 to 2% of the total population. Trail running has definitely increased, almost doubled for all ages and more than doubled for the 18 to 24. But the largest activity with the greatest growth has been hiking. And I think we see that throughout Colorado in Steamboat as well, with the all ages, almost a 50% increase in the participation of hiking from 10.8 to 14.2. And for the younger demographic, from 12.2 to 18.3. The orange areas are showing the declines. And one of the declines that we see is all age groups, as well as the 18 to 24, has seen a decrease in the participation of downhill skiing. So we also saw actually a decrease in snowboarding and snowshoeing with the younger demographic.
Paul, let me interject something real quick here. In looking at, so a big part of the market has been boomers historically, and so of course that's going to be shifting more towards millennials. But in the meantime, I call it that I say that the boomers are going through sort of the accommodation phase. So, I'm one of them. And as we get older, we want to continue to be active, but we're looking to have activities that accommodate our increasingly less ability. How's that?
Yeah.
Things like
very diplomatic.
Things like e-bikes or shifting from downhill skiing to snowshoeing, things that are kind of less maybe rigorous and pose less risk to our physical health.
But I think if we add up these percentages, on the whole, Americans are becoming more outdoor oriented than they have been in the past. And so it may have shifts within particular activities, but the total numbers of people who are engaging in outdoor activities is actually increasing. Next slide, come. All right, this one here. So when we started looking at other communities, and we actually reached out to a very large number of communities, both phone calls and emails. And of that group, we did get some response. Probably, I think we reached out to more than 50 communities and maybe got 12 or 15 to respond. But what we have found, but at the same time, we also did a lot of internet research, finding reports that other communities have done, think tanks, research institutes, so on and so forth, news articles. All in all, we ended up having quite a few sources of information to do our report on what other communities are doing. But we found that the vast majority of them really start off down at that bottom, which is the climate action. This is really the communities that are recognizing that we need to do something to slow down climate variability, global warming, and it's oftentimes in the arena of either being carbon neutral or being more sustainable or being more green, or there's a lot of different phrases for taking climate action. What can we do to slow down climate change? But then we're finding some communities going, okay, given that, is that all we can do? And the answer is no. So what can we do to improve our tourism and the tourism's impact on the environment? And that moves into the realm of sustainable tourism. That's what do we do in terms of tourism's effect on the environment, tourism's effect on the economy, tourism effect on the social fabric of communities. And we did find communities that are very focused on this. What we didn't find so much of, and I think Steamboat, you folks are really towards the cutting edge of this, is in the realm of destination management. And that really, I think, is the best way to put that is how do you bring all these together so that you're concerned with not just the environment and not just the business activities that the dollars that the tourists bring, but also the impact of the tourist on the local economy, the impact of the tourist on the environment, the impact on the global environment. And it really comes into the realm of destination management. How do we handle the traffic? How do we handle the crowds? How do we move? What's the best time to have events and activities? What are the best mix of activities? So it's more of a comprehensive approach to your tourism business. And the final, the small orange oval, is adaptation to climate change. We really found very little of that. And that's really talking about how as businesses, how do we take these changes that we wish we could avoid, but we can't? What do we do with it? How do we adapt to it so that we can benefit from this and make lemonade out of lemons, so to speak? So, Tom, next one. All right. So what we found is there are two broad strategies. We've got the gray box and the blue box. In the gray box, we came up with three subcategories: adaptation, mitigation, and diversification. In the first example of summer tourism, people will be seeking to go to cooler climates because where they're at is hotter, warmer. They're going to come to other communities. And we find that as an example of the kinds of things that you folks can do to adapt to global warming and climate change by creating and marketing and attracting tourists because you're a cooler temperature and you're a better option than some of the places that they have been going to in the past. In terms of mitigation, what we find is wildfire. That's a negative impact of drier and warmer temperatures. How do we mitigate that? And we did find a number of communities that are very concerned with wildfire and are engaging in mitigation strategies. And whether that's working with the Forest Service or working with their own businesses and community to impose a tax to do wildfire mitigation. Some of the ideas we read is to work with insurance companies, so maybe lower insurance rates in exchange for doing more wildfire mitigation. Some of the ski areas are pre-positioning their snowmaking equipment in areas that are most vulnerable during the summer so that they could provide water. But there were mitigation activities in our analysis, using various tourism attractions to help diversify the economy. And when we talk about diversification here, we're talking about in the narrow sense of diversifying the tourism-oriented activities, products, and services. So we still bring the tourists, but we just diversify our product offerings to either take advantage or to mitigate the climate variability. And all of this is to increase visitor experience opportunities through the built environment. So we see a number of built environment modifications going on in other communities, whether that's riparian restoration or enhancements, or it's increased traffic control, or there's just a number of built environment actions. On the other hand, comes the education and behavioral change. How do we educate people and change their behavior? The education of visitors, we've found several communities who are going, the increase in tourism has brought its downside, whether it's more trash or more danger of inadvertent fires being caused in the forest. How do we educate these people before they create the damages? The second aspect of this is the educational institutes, nonprofits, research agencies. We found several communities who have brought in entities to live in that community, which brings in people who live there both permanently and who come for conferences, visits, and programs. So that's another opportunity. Tom, next slide. All right. So we found some other actions by other communities. We just pulled out 4 just to give a quick example. Sedona Chamber of Commerce partnering with the Sustainability Alliance on sustainable business certification programs. And we found that in several other communities as well. Whistler's building their capacity, and they added a whole new range of activities called wildlife viewing to bring in a new revenue stream and a new demographic of tourists. Breckenridge has their dedicated tax for open space and develop more trails. And they're also funding more arts and education. That's more of the diversification. Vail focuses on visitor education, visitor change management. They have an institute there called Walking Mountain, and they have an actively green program with 80 businesses involved. So they're very involved with the business community. Next slide, Tom. So we also did research of the residents, and we found that we had a really good response of the residents, and about 81% of them felt that the net impact of tourism on the community was positive. So there's a very positive attitude towards tourism. Interestingly, 30% of the respondents who reported working full or part-time in 2017 actually owned a business in Steamboat, and 10% owned commercial real estate. Tom? We also did a survey of businesses in Steamboat. Contacted 250 businesses. We got 50 responses. And of those 50 responses, 98% of them stated that tourism is important for their revenues. They overwhelmingly understand the significant climate impacts are currently occurring. There's concern that the coming decade will bring in more negative impacts from climate variability, and it's going to affect both the natural assets as well as the region's tourism economy. 2/3 felt that intentional action needed to be taken in order to deal with climate change. That's what you folks are doing. 3/4 of them believe that those actions should be a top priority within the community. And they also felt that the shoulder seasons are underutilized and represent an opportunity for you all. Next slide, Tom. All right, so what we have here is just a sampling of responses and suggestions that people came up with. And rather than read them all, this is something you can look at, but these are individual responses that people took. And on the left-hand side are the actions that they've taken. The 2 columns on the right side, we tried to put them in categories: sustainability, marketing, resource management, and then we have 1 under regulations. So to give you an idea of the kinds of categorizations of the activities that people have come up with, this is a good idea. This is a good illustration. But you see that they create sustainability programs and more marketing and change what they sell, so on and so forth. Tom, next one, please.
Yeah, I think that's it, Paul, for here. But
okay.
Yeah, would be interested in hearing if there are other ideas or other actions you have taken in your business that are not kind of listed here or that you've heard about. Certainly, if you were to unmute yourself or send a chat to everybody, we'd love to hear that for a couple minutes.
You guys can raise your hand and I can give you permission to talk if you would like to make a comment or use the chat function. We did have someone say that they were shocked it was only 98% that saw tourism revenue as important and not 100%. But yeah, if you have any questions or comments about what they've talked about so far, please put that in the chat or raise your hand.
Yeah, hey, this is John. I was curious, and I guess it's a little bit to kind of underline the point that Jason was making about elevation um, com in comparison to other parts of the country. Jason, you're kind of talking about, folks perhaps that are visiting, from people that are in warmer locations go to other locations that have become warmer than anticipated. They're looking for new destinations, new locations to go to, and that's an opportunity. I think, maybe we think of Steamboat as those of us that live here, we think of Steamboat as a relatively low elevation compared to the rest of Colorado and other destinations. I was just curious if maybe you could expand on that a little bit and anything else that you saw there.
Yeah, that was there was actually a specific study out there looking at Routt County and the forecasted snow. And it was looking at, you know, the total snow cover, the equivalent, when the melt off happened. And that's one of the points it brought up was other locations across the country, and not just out east, but also out west, that a lot of the bigger ski resorts we think of are at lower altitude. And I was talking to a gentleman who is a head of a ski resort out east, and he said that the big kind of catchphrase there now is not it's what was the term? It's altitude, not longitude, or whatever it is now. Like how far north south you are is less important than how high you are, because that gives you that buffer. So if you have those people who maybe previously went to Killington or Snow Mountain or Sun Valley or something like that, and those places start to be degraded in the type of snow they have, the duration, then the skiers from there are going to look for alternative locations. So within Colorado, Steamboat may be at a lower altitude, but compared to those other destinations, its snow is still going to be very robust. And even within Colorado, as I had mentioned, it's one of the few areas in Colorado that's actually forecasted to see increased precipitation, where some of the other areas are going to see decreased precipitation. So there are some, yeah, again, I hate to use the term benefits when it comes to climate change or impacts, but at least opportunities that come out of the forecasts.
Thanks, Jason. Uh,
Tom, do you want to respond to Scott's comment, or you want me to?
Yeah. Well, you go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's Scott. It's that's a extremely important point. Oftentimes, businesses will think about the best way to increase profitability is to increase the number of customers, but increasing profitability is just as responsive to decreasing costs, and that's exactly what you're talking about. How do we decrease our operating costs in order to raise our margins? So, and I think as we look at this climate change, the important question is how we as businesses can reduce our operating cost to go along with increasing our revenues.
Thanks, Paul. And in case others didn't see it, Scott was referencing use of lower energy lighting and things of that nature. I'm going to continue on, and I don't know why it challenges me. Here we go. So kind of switching over to what we covered was sort of the research that was done. Just again, I reference you to the full study for a lot more detail. But here we're kind of looking forward and what are the strategic possibilities. And when you think about it, it's all about how your local tourism sector maintains and enhances its competitive advantage in the marketplace, given climate change. And given a couple of other things that really stand out, which are your Western brand, which is rather unique, and it's your community values. So I'm not going to read through these either, but I encourage you to take a look at them. And again, send us a chat message or raise your hand and comment if you'd like. But based upon all the interviews and looking at surveys This is kind of what we can summarize, and trying to get it all on one slide as well, I think. But this is kind of what we summarize as the strengths and weaknesses of Steamboat Springs as a tourist destination, as you're thinking in the context and beginning to plan around the notion of destination management. So, I think the couple that stand out, or one on the strength side, which you don't see in many places, is the strong ethos of community involvement. So that's really a lot of surveying goes on, a lot of community feedback is the norm in Routt County and Steamboat Springs. And you seem to also be on more on the cutting edge of sort of sustainable development, or trying to incorporate those concepts. On the weaknesses side, I think these are all fairly typical, and then I think one could say you're maybe even have a little bit more of a niche market with limited geographic reach or focus, especially from Colorado Front Range and Texas. Certainly not where you're exclusively pulling from, but maybe more of more density from those areas. The other weaknesses, though, I think are pretty typical of tourist destinations. Do we have any feedback there? And okay.
No, not yet. It looks like if
Oh,
folks have comments or anything, go ahead and drop them into the chat when you get a chance, or questions, and we'll get them answered throughout the.
the other thing to keep in mind, so the strengths and weaknesses are what are unique to your area and your industry specifically. The opportunities and threats are out there in the broader environment that you can take advantage of. When we're working in the strategic planning realm, we like to think in terms of leveraging your strengths to take advantage of opportunities. So, sort of the dominant planning paradigm is moving from taking advantage of opportunities that play into your strengths. But in this case, it's also very important to maybe overcome some of the weaknesses that might limit some of those opportunities. And the one I'll call out here is the interactive visitor website can be developed, improved. That's really something that I think is in the early phase of development in around many tourism destinations, and it's something to really take advantage of or think about in terms of the technologies that are rapidly evolving um, between digital world and social media. The other thing to consider, as we've mentioned several times, are the strengths or the threats that threaten or make your strengths vulnerable. And the key one again being wildfire. That is kind of maybe more unique to the West. Certainly, the Yampa River plays an important role in your tourism sector, and that may be that's a unique issue. And the bottom one there, the status of federal lands and budget priorities for managing and using those lands. We're looking into we know that the budget allocation for managing and maintaining a lot of the federal lands has always been lower than many of us would maybe hope for. Um, and that could become an even greater issue with climate change and drying of forests and ground, and having to deal with that, and then compare that with where kind of the federal government is increasing deficits. So that's something to keep an eye on, and really to try to solve how to address those issues. Or again, are there any submittals on thoughts about the opportunities and threats?
I don't know if everyone saw, but Scott mentioned that we should add affordable housing scarcity to these threats.
Okay.
And Paul responded that you guys do mention that in the body of the report.
Right.
Or the
Right.
weaknesses, excuse me.
Right. And so that's certainly a weakness. And again, that's one we find pretty much consistent in most tourism areas, but it's certainly a weakness. Okay, good. Thank you, Scott. Looking at
Tom, Tom, before we go on, we do have someone asking another question. Angelina, did you see that? How do you address businesses and owners who think that taking actions to being more sustainable and addressing climate change will only hurt their business?
Well, my answer to that is where we have seen certification programs, business certifications programs put out there by the local community. The businesses are jumping on to that bandwagon, if you will, quicker and quicker, or is sort of certainly adopting it. And the reason is they find it's advantageous in their marketing efforts. Especially in marketing to the millennial generation, which will be your dominant future customer base. So it's so I mean, some, no doubt that some see it as a negative additional cost, but I think increasingly the notion that adopting or pursuing sustainable practices, while there may be an investment upfront or some higher costs initially, the payoffs seem to be significant enough that more businesses, once they see it, are jumping on.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. So here is kind of, a graphic which we're trying to just describe our recommendation of sort of your grand strategy, or which falls under the destination management approach. And at the center is your central objective or vision. So successfully adapt the industry to climate change, and do so within the context of sustainability. Now, remember that sustainability also includes economic sustainability. And so I tend to define sustainability as durable. How do we make sure that whatever we're doing is durable over time? And that includes economic sustainability. And so trying to create in strategic planning for companies, we talk about sustainable competitive advantage. So having a competitive advantage is great. Now, how do you turn that into something that is sustainable over time? And then the key result areas here to focus on, just to keep it simple, are resources. And here we're talking about both financial resources, which are always a challenge for everyone, but also your natural resources that are so important to your local tourism industry. Learning, again, we're thinking about learning as maybe changing our mental mindsets, questioning our own assumptions about the future or how we do things, but also includes a key learning component of education, and getting tourists to learn and to understand the delicate nature and the high risk posed with fire risk, for instance, or just the need to be more sustainable in their tourism practices when hiking or mountain biking, things of that nature. The marketing, of course, is always a key element of destination management. And in this case, we've added technology as sort of a glue that binds them all together, because the technology front is changing. It's basically changing on every front, not just with data and machine learning and the ability to hyper target customers, but also in the ability to do better monitoring of trail usage and wear and tear, and the need for maintenance dollars. So when we talk about target marketing or marketing, we're talking really about three areas or three broad targets. One are the tourists themselves, and revisiting your complete marketing strategy as a destination, and looking at how it can be tweaked, or how to adapt it as necessary. But we're also talking about marketing to the tourist-oriented businesses. So how do we improve engagement and insight, or or get innovation, people thinking in more innovative terms. And I do think that Steamboat Springs has a strong culture for being really being competitive, being winners with your tourism, with your Olympic history, but also with your business startups that are related to outdoor rec over the years, are pretty significant. And so there's a lot of innovation in your culture and the opportunity to maybe build upon that. Residents, and then the third group of marketing is continuing to work with residents, even though there's broad-based support on net. You need an ongoing active public relations and awareness campaign of what the community is doing, what tourism means. And the city does do periodic surveys, but there's also the opportunity to do sentiment analysis and to see what issues might be coming up real time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to wrap us up here. And I'd like to kind of end with a little bit of a brainstorm effort. So Paul, go ahead.
Okay. Now between Tom and I and Jason, and going through all of the research that we did and all the interviews and our own thinking, we came up with a very long list of potential strategic actions. Some of them big, some of them are small, but we tried to put them then into some kind of an order where 50 is too much to deal with. So we came up with some subcategories of how we thought these strategies will fit. And these subcategories, one was physical environmental mitigation, enhancements, modifications. So in other words, what do we do with the natural world and the physical world that we're dealing with? And that's both the built infrastructure as well as the natural infrastructure. The second category was destination management approach, and that's a whole field that is kind of where the leading edge tourism communities are heading towards. Quality of life for residents, and that goes to Scott's comment about housing. There are a number of other things about quality of life, but having a good quality of life for residents is both a means to an end and an end in and of itself. Engagement and collaboration, quite a few different possibility of engagement and collaboration. That could be the business community and the local residents and the city government and the chamber, but it also includes collaboration with state agencies. It could include collaboration with educational institutions, CU Boulder or Fort Collins or other institutions around the country. It can include collaboration between the agricultural community and the fishing community and the outdoor recreation community. There are win-win opportunities out there. There's the category of strategies under visitor experience and marketing. In other words, how do we reach these visitors in a way that enhances the business success and the environmental success of the community and in a collaborative manner? The educational sector development. And once again, we thought about, there are other communities that have institutes. That means full-time employees who live there, who are relatively well paid. But we could go all the way from a small effort to we've got Davos. I mean, we could have the Davos of climate adaptation for businesses, or we could look at Jackson Hole, and they are a center known for the worldwide banking. So we could look really big, or we can look at a more achievable or doable, smaller level. Technological adaptation. There's quite a few ideas that we've seen and come up with in terms of how do we improve the visitor experience through technology? How do we improve the business success through technology? And then finally, financing incentives. How do we get behavioral change and physical change, and how does that get paid? And what ideas do we have? We don't simply want to increase taxes. That's never popular. But are there other ways to finance and create incentives for change that we're looking for? Tom? Would you like to go on to the next slide? There you go. All right. So here, I think we really want to have a group discussion. So go ahead and unmute yourself or send a chat message. But we're really looking for ideas, additional ideas, because I think what we've all learned over the years is that all of us have some great ideas, and our job is to harvest those ideas, bring them together, and use the knowledge that you have all built over your lifetime. So what actions might we take as a tourism industry through public-private partnership or individually to take that have a high chance of success to grow our competitive advantage.
Thanks, Paul. We have one question that came in about promoting responsible tourism. And the Chamber does some of that work on their social media and their website, like trail etiquette, tubing safety. But have you seen any other specific tools, and maybe this touches on the technology adaptation piece you were just talking about, but have you seen any other tools in other areas that can help with this education piece? Or if anyone
Tom,
else has?
Do you want to start with that,
Yeah,
Tom?
we're with education and changing behavior. First, you have to create the awareness and get people to kind of see the problem, accept the problem, and understand it. And one of the key elements of doing that is repetition. So imagine, in some communities, increasingly you see the same message at every restaurant they walk into. Might have to do, respect the trail, or whatever that message is, whatever you're trying to achieve. But I think, to me, as a general rule, when it's a special experience driving down Rabbit Ears Pass into the valley, and to kind of create sort of that similar messaging throughout, that this is a special place and we all need to participate and take care of it. And even you don't want to be negative, but it's like, we want people coming here who appreciate that. It can also happen through hyper target marketing, so identifying those people and groups that do have that respect, and spending more dollars on attracting more like-minded people.
And for examples of that, I think Breckenridge and Vail have done a really good job of trying to educate all the visitors to the community through a business collaboration where people get the same message and it's repeated, and they get the effect that they're looking for.
Thanks. We have Joe in our chat who talks about Steamboat's nonprofit environmental education organizations that could be utilized more, and that there are opportunities to partner more with them. And so if anyone else has any comments on that topic, please add that to the chat. But Joe, I think that's a really great point.
Super.
Joe, do you have some ideas on how that might be done?
Joe, I can allow you to talk if you would like. And then Scott in our Q&A also mentioned that a way we could do this was find sustainable funding source for marketing. Scott, thank you for that.
I was curious if you could maybe, we hear in tourism destinations, we hear about destination management organizations, and we also hear about destination marketing organizations. I was curious if you guys see a clear difference between those, and what are they, and what's that look like? I wonder if you could talk around that just a second.
So the difference, let me just repeat the question, the difference between destination management and destination marketing, right?
Yep.
And I think that you see the early phase, right? So many tourist destinations have been in tune with destination marketing for quite some time, really decades. And so it's only, and we're especially seeing it emerging in Asia, in the Pacific Rim, but also in Europe. But you're beginning to see the notion of, well, even in Steamboat, you have kind of the underpinnings where there's concerns over overcrowding in the summer, right? And so what can we do to move more activity into the shoulder seasons? So that's an example of of really destination management. So it's looking at how do we change our product mix. It may be marketing in nature, but it's more involved in trying to address some of the challenges and problems that emerge from being too successful with destination marketing. You can also, I think, see it with increasing technology, whereby looking where you can see before you go which parking lots are full, right? For trailheads, for instance, that would be an example of a destination management where you're enhancing the experience. So it's sort of related to marketing, but not necessarily promotion. But you're also then hopefully protecting or at least mitigating overcrowding on the trail system. Those would be a couple of examples. Jason or Paul, you have more thoughts on that?
I think you covered it there, Tom.
Right.
There's just quite a few ideas that will pop. If we start focusing on that as a group effort, more ideas will come up. Many,
Sure.
many. Yeah.
Well, and I think, Paul, you really hit the nail on the head earlier when I believe you used the term like comprehensive.
Mhm.
That this has been an introduction for me to destination management, and that was my big takeaway. That it's much more comprehensive. So it takes the locals into account. It takes the trails into account. It takes tourism into account, and it tries to balance all of those out and move forward with that in mind. Where destination marketing is obviously very kind of specific in its intent and what it's trying to manifest.
And I think that comprehensiveness comes from the participation from all of those affected, as opposed to being destination marketing might just be the results of the efforts of the chamber, and other folks are a little more passive participation. Destination management is active participation by all.
And what's interesting too is the COVID experience has seen sort of two things that we both see around Colorado and some of the other communities with a lot of outdoor recreation and trail systems and parks. The growth in the past summer was just phenomenal, exceeded everybody's expectations. It was in some cases alarming. But in other parts of the world, what has occurred, especially in wetter climates, is where certain areas just close down. And so outdoor recreation areas may have shut. And I think part of it is there's not as good of access in the US. We're so used to hopping in a car and driving 2.5 hours from Denver, and there you are in Steamboat. But in other parts of the world, you have to fly in. And with the hindrances we saw there in the last year, what they found, like in parts of Thailand, that areas that had a lot of tourists that were essentially shut down, they found the ecosystems recuperated in a very short amount of time. And so now they're debating whether or not they should have an annual shutdown or rotate areas that are closed to let things regenerate.
Yeah.
Now, the problem in Colorado, as we all know, is that with the dry climate naturally and the terrain, it's not just a matter of a year to let something regenerate. And so it takes a more concerted effort and probably puts more emphasis on education up front.
Well, Tom, and it looks like we're right up at the hour mark, so we should probably wrap it up with any final thoughts as we close this up.
And we continue to accept comments, suggestions, questions, whatever. I mean, this is not closed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And certainly, see, you continue to be a point person on it, John. So if people have comments or questions, I would say you're the guy.
Yeah, you can give me a call or send an email, john@steamboatchamber.com. And I dropped in the link a couple times into the chat, and it's posted on the city's website. Folks can download it there and review it and share it, and hopefully create conversation around it. So this has been a big effort. And certainly want to thank all three of you on this. It's a tremendous project.
Appreciate it. And I think just sort of as a closeout for this presentation, but also the effort in general, John, my own thoughts, having first been introduced to Steamboat back in the late 70s, and have staying somewhat connected to the community over the years. It really is a unique place that's different than, we can't find one that's very, very similar. And so and as Jason pointed out, there are opportunities that are emerging as well. Certainly a huge risk that you need to, I think, address first and foremost, which is wildfire risk in the coming years. But I keep going back to the notion that the real objective here, and what's unique about Steamboat, is you're kind of in a kind of have a comfort zone, and already in terms of, you've got a successful tourism industry, you've got a high quality of life, and so the major emphasis on maintaining that and maintaining that competitive advantage that you have in the marketplace while adapting to what's a given. It's not a question of if and when. It's already happened. It's happening, and I can tell you for certain that you are the only community that we found in our research that has specifically said, okay, we want to be more sustainable, or we want to do these other things. But you're the only community that's saying, we want to come up with a plan of action and intentional action as an industry, but also in conjunction with the public sector, who relies heavily on our industry for tax dollars. We want to come up with a specific intentional plan of how to adapt to the changes that are occurring and will continue to occur, and maybe be ahead of the curve, and use that to your advantage competitively. So good luck with that.
Well put. Thank you.
I wanted to thank the Steamboat community on behalf of Summit Economics for having this project. This project has been one of the most rewarding and engaging projects that we've had. It's been a treat for us. So thank you, everybody there.
Thanks, Paul.
Yes,
Great
thanks.
to work with you. Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. This is also being recorded, so we will send out the link and share it with everyone once that video is processed, and you can continue to pass on this with your contacts and your organizations if someone wasn't able to attend today.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Best of luck.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye-bye, all.
Thanks, everybody.